Hello everyone, I'm Hannah Lloyd.
And I'm Charlotte Gilfillan.
Welcome to our podcast, Women in Wellies.
Each episode we will be inviting a guest to share their stories, experiences and lessons of working and living in rural Scotland.
We want to get to know the real women behind the Wellies and share them with you, our listeners.
Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Women in Wellies podcast. Today I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our guest, Lynn Cassells. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us. We've been really looking forward to this. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to come on to this. It's great to sort of have some time to chat with you guys.
Now, a lot of our listeners will know who you are already and some of the fantastic work that you're doing, but perhaps you can tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so this all happened by accident. That's the first part. So I'm Lynn. So my partner and I run Lynbreck Croft, which is a sort of a small regenerative landholding, about 150 acres in the Cairngorms National Park in Scotland. And I sort of say it's kind of a wonderful accident in that we kind of got into agriculture completely by accident, in that we were living and working down in the south of England, working as rangers in kind of conservation roles. Spent a couple of years after that in the borders tree planting, and that was a really interesting time for us because in our own lives we made this kind of transition from learning about conservation to actually learning about what people kind of most commonly term as rewilding. So, you know, looking at upland landscapes or anywhere really, and looking at kind of restoring natural processes. And so really kind of got into that kind of world a lot more, which was quite interesting for us. Started to question our food choices, started to question just our environmental impact in general. And at that time we were looking for a wee bit of land, just 5 acres. That was the ideal. Looking for about 5 acres of land to grow our own food, maybe have a few camping plots, diversify a little, make what money we needed to pay the bills. And anyway, kind of long and short of it is, ended up at Lynbreck Croft, which is 15 times bigger, so 150 acres. And I remember we arrived in the kind of March 2016, and we were looking at kind of all this land thinking, you know, what are we going to do? And, you know, the irony kind of the sort of the transition to that point was that we thought, yeah, farming, this is what we've got to do. But it was trying to do it in a way where, you know, this was back in the day in 2016 when people really weren't talking about regenerative agriculture. You know, now it's such a popular term, right? But it wasn't really a thing back then, certainly not mainstream. So we started to try and carve out this model whereby we would have this kind of really diverse, multi-purpose landscape with kind of farmed animals, but also where kind of nature was flourishing. So that's kind of how we got to where we are today.
You mentioned rewilding. I often think rewilding has now become quite a generic term, but what does it mean to you?
So for me, rewilding is 100% about people, like 100% about people. You know, often it can be misinterpreted. I would say from my perspective, it can be misinterpreted as something whereby we have to, you know, we, the collective we of humanity, have to restore nature because we've damaged it in some kind of way. I think whenever and then we sort of leave it. I think for me that doesn't do anything other than build greater division between us as a species and the rest of nature, because we are essentially a part of nature. So for me, rewilding is all about getting people back onto the land. It's about getting people to reconnect with their food, reconnect with the life that we share on this planet. And then from that, healing naturally happens. So that's entirely, that for me, that's exactly what it's about.
And does that play a big part in your ethos at Lynbreck Croft?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it probably does. You know, we've always had this draw to try and communicate what it is that we do. So we've always wanted to share our story, share our thought process, share, you know, our learnings, our outcomes, all that sort of stuff. And that's led us to obviously have, you know, social media accounts. We do tours, we run courses here seasonally. We do all of our sales are direct to the customer. So we're always trying to have those conversations and just really look at ways in which we can play our little role in kind of connecting people or providing an opportunity for people to connect with nature, but then also kind of empowering them to go off and share that message with others. So it's really, I guess, all about just trying to spread that sort of positive dialogue rather than that sort of negative wall building, and just getting people to really, fall in love with the land that we share all this life with.
Having been on one of your tours earlier this year, it was a genuinely eye-opening experience for me. I obviously work in land management and have been trying to learn as much as I can about rewilding, about regenerative agriculture, what the principles are, how it can be applied in practice. And I just loved it. It was so insightful, and you were incredibly honest in how you talk about things and how you present the challenges that you faced, and how Lynbreck Croft has gone from what it was when you bought it to what it is now. And one of the things I have to say that really sparked my interest was when you talked about tree hay. I hadn't heard of that term before, having come on the tour, and it has just absolutely fascinated me. And I've learned so much about where tree hay is used around the world in different countries and different species and different animals. And it's been absolutely fascinating. But I mean, that for me is just one example of that message that you're spreading and that message that you're getting out there, and how it is really sparking people's interest.
Yeah, and I think there was two pieces of info, or sorry, two pieces of advice. Well, we were given loads of advice when we were starting up, but there was two main ones that we were given, and one was work with what you've got, and that's the thing about whenever you're kind of living and working with nature. And we were in a position as well where when we moved to Lynbreck, we had no money at all. We had a debt to pay off, so really we didn't have the opportunity to invest in loads of infrastructure from our own funds. So we just had to work with what we had, and that was one of the kind of the things that led us down. Let's use that example of tree hay. It was looking around at the landscape that we had, and that's the other thing about where we live and work, is that I think from what I've learned is that if you look at the land holding that we have with sort of trained agricultural eyes, you probably would think it was a bit rubbish, because there's a lot of there's a very little in by. It's mostly hill ground and bog and all that sort of thing. To us, it was the land of milk and honey. We thought it was amazing. And when you look at tree leaves, we saw them as an opportunity for providing shade and shelter for our cattle, so we didn't need to build housing. We saw it as an opportunity as extra feed for the livestock, both in summer and the winter time. And I love tree hay, because tree hay is something that we've done for millennia, with keeping livestock. We've harvested pasture hay, we've harvested tree hay in the wintertime, so in the summertime to feed in the wintertime. So for us, it was another way just to kind of eke out everything that we had. How can we reduce our bills? How can we reduce what we have to buy in for the livestock and generate it here on site? And tree hay is a great example of doing that.
Yeah. So take us back then to when you first bought Lynbreck Croft and what you had then and what you have built now.
So whenever we moved here, yeah, there wasn't an awful lot. there was a little cabin, little wooden cabin, which is where we live, and there was an old stone barn, or byre as we call it, and that was derelict. It had half a roof on it, and then there was the old croft house that was also derelict. And the only kind of agricultural infrastructure, and I put that in a kind of a quote unquote agricultural infrastructure, was there was a very kind of dodgy fence that ran around more or less the perimeter of the croft, and that was it. So I guess in the sort of, to summarize it, in the last 7.5 years, we've installed about 5 kilometers of deer fencing, about 8 kilometers of stock fencing. So we've created a proper kind of little network of field system now in the croft. We've planted just over 30,000 trees, mixture of sort of new forest, again, which will all be inclusive of livestock once the forest is established. We've created hedgerows. We've created shelter belts. We've planted, we're planting orchards. What else have we done? We haven't been twiddling our thumbs that much. We've built a new barn. We renovated the old byre. We've installed a micro butchery on the croft. So I always say to people when they come on the tour, Lynbreck is a landscape in transition. It's a landscape in healing, and there's a lot of conversation about the transition between sort of commercial, conventional agriculture as we do it now to how do we transition to a point of where we're being truly regenerative or organic, or however you want to describe it. And it's a process that takes a bit of time. So we're just a little bit into that journey. So we're working a lot on sort of building soils, enhancing wildlife, adding lots of biodiversity back into the croft. So the tree landscape that we're creating is all a part of that. And then we've also we've introduced livestock. So we have a small fold of Highland cattle. We have rare breed pigs, we have pasture hens, and then we have hives of bees as well. We've built 2 polycrubs, one of which we use to grow our own food. We've just built our second polycrub. That's going to be to grow small scale commercial veg for sale. And again, I guess from the engagement side, we now have a kind of a regular summer timetable of public tours. We also do some tours for private tour companies, and we run 2 week-long courses as well, which is all about, we call it living off the land, how to farm. It's all about, I love that you picked up on our honesty when you came on the tour. And I think that's one of the things that we really do try to do, because, a lot of farming can happen behind closed doors. A lot of people who aren't in farming have no idea what happens in farming. So for us, it's an opportunity to share that with the wider public. And we talk about it honestly from these are the challenges, these are the opportunities, this is, all that kind of stuff we cover in our courses as well. So that's more or less filled the last 7.5 years.
One of the things that's perhaps been most inspirational in all this is that the two of you have done it yourselves. You've done all this work. You've done the hard graft. You've done the planning. You've done the applying for funding. You've done everything yourself. And it's it's a phenomenal testament to what you've achieved.
No, that's really kind of you. And I mean, yeah, reflecting on why we've sort of taken that route to doing it all ourselves is, I guess, one hand, it was a confidence thing, in that we weren't feeling very confident in what we were doing, because a lot of it we were kind of almost making it up as we were going along. We were following our guts, trying to think how do we want this to look. And as I say, back when we were setting Lynbreck up, we didn't have the sort of the access now to what is this much bigger or much kind of faster growing regenerative agriculture movement. So we didn't really have anybody to look to much. So I think in part that's one of the reasons why we just kind of tended to do it ourselves. And I think as well, as kind of Lynbreck, as as the work that we've kind of done has grown and people have become, know more about it, we've also become quite protective of it as our own personal space, as a home space. So it's another reason why we've probably kept a lot of it, us doing it ourselves, because whilst we engage a lot and we have people here all the time, we also are very careful to have breaks in that, and have your own kind of quiet space, your own kind of downtime. So that's probably a reason. That's probably the reason as to why we've both kind of, just kind of stuck at us two doing it ourselves. We're not total control freaks, don't worry.
As the croft has grown, as this business has grown, how have you grown as a person? How has this changed you?
Yeah, gosh, in many ways that I don't think either of us ever expected, because, I sort of joke about it being an accident, but it really wasn't what the plan was. The plan was to buy a little bit of land, live that kind of quintessential idealistic, good life that many of us dream of. And that was the plan. And I think, we've gone on this kind of new trajectory, in a way where, we did BBC Farming Life. We've written a book. We've done all this kind of other stuff in a while, kind of building up this little kind of, trying to keep a fairly vibrant rural little business. And it's been nothing short of a massive roller coaster. Been times when, it's been really exciting, when everything kind of comes together and you get projects undergoing, you maybe apply for a bit of funding and you get the money, and then you can kind of do these projects, and that's really exciting. But then there's times when, it doesn't go to plan, and it feels quite frightening. I always describe, for me, getting into agriculture, it has been like, has been relentless. So there are times when the good times roll, and then there are times when it just, one thing after the next just goes wrong. And, you can start to feel quite isolated and quite overwhelmed by everything, because I think one of the things, in farming and crofting is that you become so rooted to the land, don't you? You become so connected to the land, and that includes the animals that are in your care. And so when stuff really starts to go wrong, just that weight of responsibility sits so heavily on your shoulders. So we've gone through, complete elation to, to genuine kind of worry and fear. And I think both of those things have really shaped us into respecting so much more people that work in farming and crofting. I didn't get it before. Now I really do. So that's been a big kind of life-changing thing. And I think as well, one of the things that it's really brought us closer to is our food. So I think maybe one of the things that you might have got on the tour is that we're totally obsessed with food, like totally obsessed with food. It's pretty much all we talk about. We love food, and it's become a bit of an obsession in terms of our own kind of personal physical and mental well-being as we've grown in that, learning about the importance of food for keeping us healthy, as a form of medicine, as a form of way of, not just nurturing, our gut microbiome, but nurturing our minds as well. And so that's why we put so much time into growing our own food. First and foremost, we have this really abundant kitchen garden in a place where people thought nothing would ever grow. We cultivate, huge amounts of abundance by growing with nature. And we thrive off of that. Like, we totally buzz off of it. And then you kind of expand that out into the wider kind of landscape, and the meat that we produce, and all of that starts to feed into then the conversations that we have with people, and just really understanding and really respecting just how important good food is for us. And it's been really interesting in the last few years. I listen to a lot of kind of podcasts to do with sort of well-being, and I really enjoy ones on food. And the science that's now starting to come out that talks about the benefits of, food that is grown with nature, that is, free of chemicals, that is free of anything artificial that we put onto it, but that is grown in a way that genuinely gives us health. And that really excites me. That so excites me. And then to get people to come to the Croft, to share that message with them, and then to really empower them to go off and grow their own food, or source more kind of locally grown produce, or organic or regenerative, whatever. Like, they go off buzzing about it. And so I really, that's been a big kind of eye opener to us as well, I think.
I was just going to say, I'm very lucky that my partner grows a lot of our fruit and veg and stuff, here at home. We've got a little small holding. And yesterday we were out with friends, and I'd made a picnic, and I just cut up some carrot sticks from the garden, and they were all saying over and over again how, like, the carrots taste so different, they taste so fresh, they taste so good, but literally they're like harvested that morning, cut up and eaten, and they just taste so different. And I think it's only really in the last, probably like this year, we've had a real abundance of things like carrots and cabbages, and it's only when you start to eat them that you start to realize actually how much better they taste and how artificial other things can taste. And I think I'm just sat here thinking, like, what you're doing and bringing that to people, and bringing people to the Croft so they can see it, they can taste it, they can experience it, is so important. Because in our own small way, having a picnic with friends yesterday and giving them those carrots, and they're like, oh, I don't think I ever want to eat a supermarket carrot again. And you're like, well, that's because it's full of chemicals and blah blah blah. But it's I think it's that it's everything, isn't it? It's the taste, it's all of that. I'm totally loving it. I really need to come on a tour at Lynbreck.
Yeah, you do. No, it's great. It's great to hear that. And I think it's just sharing that learning, and it's sharing it in a way. I always say, when people come to Lynbreck, I don't have to try and convince you of what we're doing. You can kind of see it for yourselves. And I think that's what's really powerful. And it's like what you've just explained. You don't have to convince them that it tastes better. They can taste it themselves. And I think that's where the conversation does start to get really interesting. Of, well, how can we make this more mainstream? How can we make this the sort of the future of food, or the future of what's kind of nourishing us and making us healthy? And I think that's when, you know one of the things that I've recently started to talk about at Lynbreck is explaining this, how it's a landscape in transition, because often we'll get questions of, how do you scale this, and I always say, well, everything that we do has actually been taken from things that are done on much bigger scales. So there's loads of examples of how to do this at much bigger scale than what we're doing. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is that, we do have a lot of people to feed. Equally, we waste a lot of our food. So we have to address that. We have to address, how much we grow, how we distribute it, and start to kind of have those conversations. And then I think the next thing is to think about, well, how do we transition ourselves from the way, from more kind of chemical based farming to one which is truly regenerative, which is all about building soils where we're not having to put these artificial inputs into the land. How do we do that? And it is a process of transition. You can't just stop one and start another. It's a completely different way of growing and producing food, you could argue. So the landscape that you see at Lynbreck is in that transition. So it used to be, it was traditionally crofted. So you would have set stocked animals. It would have been the fields would have been ploughed. They would have been reseeded. We would have had lime on the field. The fertilizer, and that takes time to transition a landscape and develop habitats, develop different cropping systems, develop different animal enterprises to then transition it into a truly regenerative landscape. So we're 7 years into that. And I reckon it's probably not going to be until maybe year 25 or year 30 where you're really going to see abundance coming out of Lynbreck. You'd have been here 7 years ago. There was no food produced here, zero. Now we pretty much grow our own food. We're producing thousands of eggs a year. We're producing hundreds of kilos of pork, hundreds of kilos of beef. We're producing honey. You project that 25 years into the future. Once we've opened up all this area of woodland that we're trying to grow, you can see more animals playing an important part in there. The cattle, the pigs. You're almost doubling the size of land that we can access. Once our orchards start to produce, once our soft fruit orchards start to produce, you start to just see the thing kind of blossoming and blossoming. So it's a transition point. But I think, Hannah, that the thing that really kind of brings all of it back to us as humans is what I see when people come here is they just love it. They just connect with it. They stand in the kitchen garden and they're like, look at the size of that beetroot, and I'm like, yeah, and we're at 350 meters above sea level. We're facing all the prevailing winds. We're on deeply acidic soils. We're at 57 degrees latitude. This shouldn't work, but it does. And it's just about really kind of getting people to see that and experience that, and then saying to them, what do you choose? What do you choose? What could you choose if you had the opportunity to buy or grow or source produce like this? Which would you choose? And I feel pretty confident that I know what the answer would be.
Everything you've just said, Lynn, about kind of all the why and the kind of seeing people standing in the kitchen garden going, wow, look at that beetroot grown here. I mean, we get the same, like friends come over and they're like, wow, look at what you've grown here. We're on the west coast in Ayrshire. We're in a very exposed location. Gary works very hard to protect stuff from the wind and all of those things, and my dad was here this weekend and I made salad on Friday night, and he's like, and I'm like, that whole salad is homegrown, the cucumber, the peppers, the tomatoes, the lettuce. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yep. And he's like, I can't grow that in my house in Edinburgh, but I think that kind of response from people is, I get the impression from what you're saying, Lynn, is part of what inspires you guys to keep going and to keep sharing what you're doing at Lynbreck and to create that kind of community and all those things.
Again, working in farming and crofting, it is relentless. It's something, and that's something that we've had to learn to manage, which we're getting better at. We've not got it sorted yet, but we're starting to learn much better to have a better work-life balance, taking time off in the evenings, going on holidays, all that sort of stuff. But it still can be, hard going because you love it. I was up this morning, we've got some friends staying, and I was up this morning and it was about 7:30, and we've got an old trailer and there's wheels on it that have been rusting, and I've been meaning to do it for, to kind of scrape the rust off and paint them. And at 7:30 this morning, I was out there in a midge net, scraping the paint off the wheels, to kind of scraping the rust off to paint it. And I just thought, I don't need to be here right now, but yet I choose to be because I love it. It's these little things that just draw you into it, because it's not just a day job. It is kind of a way of living too. So I think in the context of all of that, though, it can be quite hard sometimes. And sometimes if we have got a group in or whatever, and I'm feeling a bit tired, I'm sort of there kind of rallying myself, going, right, I've just got to kind of rally myself. And usually within about 5 minutes, I'm in it, because I feel the energy. And that's what's really nice too. You feel there's an energy exchange. So as much as I'm giving information and trying to kind of show people and this and that and the other, I can feel it coming back to me. So it becomes this sort of cyclone where we're just feeding off each other's energy. And sometimes it doesn't have to be discussed. It's just there. You can almost see kind of, chests and hearts open to what it is that they're experiencing. And that really is just the wonder of nature. And to see people connect with the land on that way, we can kind of go into a tour, just thinking, oh, my energy's low. And then you come out of it 3 hours later and you're like, yes, so that definitely helps. Because I think, again, just to that point, again, one of the things that I think is very easy to do in farming and crofting is to kind of just do your own thing, and we've done that. You just do your own thing, and that can be quite isolating. So whenever you expand that out and you share that in a way where you're being honest and open, our experience is that has come back tenfold in a really positive way. So that helps keeping us motivated too.
And Lynn, you talked earlier about kind of using social media and all those kind of things. Has that helped you create a kind of community that you can feed off, even when, because you don't do tours and courses all year, but has that kind of online community kind of come together that you can kind of feed off and share stuff all year, that kind of gives you that energy, maybe when in the short winter days when you're like, oh, it's not raining for a week and
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. And I think, social media has been a really powerful tool for many people. It is a tool, so it's something that you have to make work for you. You don't work for it. And I say that from experience of working for it rather than, using it as a tool. But now we've got it again, it's something that, we use to share information or experiences or stories, not for kind of clickbait. So that's been a really positive thing about social media, is that we've got a platform to do that. And I think as well, yeah, it is nice in times of the winter, because you can reach out to people and share stories, and I think people get a lot of information from that. But equally, in the context of the winter, one of the things that we've really again embraced with this way of living and working is seasonality. So summer is busy, it's full, it's long days, it's courses, it's whatever else, it's harvest. Winter is just a period of hibernation. So sometimes that's actually when I take a social media break. I'll take a month off, and I'll just be like, you know what, we're just gonna close up for a month, and we're just gonna hibernate. And I absolutely love it. I love that hibernation time. I love that kind of rest and recovery. I feel so privileged to live a life where I don't think, oh, I dread the winter. I'm like, bring the winter on. I am ready to be in winter. So that's been really nice. But again, from the engagement side, we can kind of use it and work with it in a way that works with that harmony, that works with that balance. So the summertime is busier, is more engagement, is more people. In the winter, you're plugging yourself into the socket to recharge, so you can manage it a little bit more.
Love that. I love that you have carved out a life that you can hibernate. I wish I could hibernate all winter after a busy summer. Like, that would be so good. Just like batten down the hat. The other thing I was just going to ask about, kind of on the theme of community, is you obviously moved to Lynbreck. You've shared, you weren't from an agricultural background. And how did the community around Lynbreck, kind of beyond your kind of dodgy fence that was roughly marking out your croft, how did they react and respond to you guys kind of moving in, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, no, it's a really nice question because we have a few kind of immediate farming neighbours, and from day one they've just been absolutely superb. And I think on reflection, one of the reasons why they've been so great is because we reached out to them to ask for advice and help and guidance, because at that point we really didn't have a clue what we were doing. So we would ask them all, what would you do with this field? What do you think we should do with blah blah blah? What animals should we get? All that kind of thing. So I think that helped, because what we definitely weren't doing was coming and going, oh, and you should do this and you should do that, because we didn't know. Wider afield, it's interesting. I still don't really know what a lot of our kind of not immediate neighbors but local farmers think of what we do. I think they're definitely interested in what we do. I think it's piqued interest. I think yeah, I think there's probably a mixture. Some people will think, oh, they're just sort of lifestylers doing that kind of thing, playing around. Some, I think, really see genuinely that we're trying to create a proper, sort of little rural business that's feeding people. Yeah, I don't know, but everybody's really nice to our faces, so that's the.
As long as they're nice to your faces, then it's fine, isn't it? I know somebody who farms kind of in the east of the country, and he takes a regenerative approach. And he said, you see them kind of peering over the fences and like looking at what you're doing, but not coming to ask the question. So he's hosted a few events to try and get them to kind of come and see what they're doing.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, no, and that's a really good way to do it. Yeah.
I would like to talk about your book, Our Wild Farming Life, which you released last year, and going back to how honest you've been throughout this process. The book it's a searingly honest insight into everything that you've done, and I think you're a really natural storyteller, and it's beautifully written. But what was it like writing it, and what was it like putting so much of yourselves out into the world in a book? Obviously, you'd done Our Farming Life and things, but what was it like putting it all down on paper, the challenges that you faced and the experiences that you'd had and the journey that you'd been on? Was there a degree of vulnerability about putting that out into the world?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so sort of going back to the story of how the book came about. So we were approached by Chelsea Green, who's the publishing house that produced the book, back in, I think it wasn't that long after lockdown, actually, the first lockdown. And they approached us about writing a book, and yeah, we did. We kind of went back and forth for a little while, and then we thought, yeah, we'll do it. We gave them a little bit of sample writing, and they were like, yeah, you can write a book, so, or you can write anyway. So that started a process of, right, we were given a deadline. I think it was end of March 2021 was the first deadline, I think. And so I'd spent all winter writing it, because I've written it. Basically, Sandra kind of edited it, so it's all kind of written in my voice. And I think we did about 10 edits, and then we sent it into the publishing house and had this kind of toe curling meeting with the editor, who just went, no, this isn't going to work. And you just think, oh my god, because you literally poured everything into it. But funny, so sort of in synopsis, I'd basically written it almost like a series of essays, because I've only ever written kind of academic documents, but in the past, from being at uni. And her feedback was, you need to be more honest. Not that we weren't being honest in the first draft, but more, I would say, not necessarily honest with content, but honest with the writing. I'd written it in a way of, this is how it should be, rather than writing how I'm speaking to you here today. So after a month of licking our wounds, I just thought, right, I'm going to go for it. And I think this was the beginning of the beginning of May 2021, and we've been given the end of July 2021 for the second draft. So it was a really tight turnaround. And I basically rewrote about 80% of the book. And what I did was the editor gave us some notes to help us guide us, but I just basically read the book and went, how would I tell this story as if I was sharing it with you as I'm talking? And that's really how the whole book was rewritten. So yeah, I mean, I think there's probably there's some stories that went in that came out again. There's some that went in that we sort of bit our nails about and went, let's just leave it. Because I think, that honesty is so important for people to engage with and to connect with. So it just sort of evolved. It just sort of evolved like that. And then obviously it came to, last year, when the kind of the main promotion around the book was happening, and that was quite an unnerving time, because we were working with the publishing house, and they had a sort of a publicist who was working with us. And we were having to do an article. We had to do an article for the Telegraph magazine, and it became that became a kind of an exciting but almost a bit of a frightening time, because you sort of felt like there was this big kind of media kind of machine behind you, but you were sort of almost throwing yourself in the pit where the media does what the media does. So that was a bit unnerving, but fortunately it was all really positive. And yeah, I think it's been sort of, most people that have read it seem to have liked it, so we're pleased about that. And it's another way of getting it out to a bigger audience who we never could have reached before.
Yeah, and you do a lot of speaking and things now as well, don't you? I think I read somewhere that you'd done a conference and you'd done talked about 500 people. Is that something that you always envisaged yourself doing? I mean, how has your kind of confidence developed over this whole process?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk to anybody that wants to talk to me, really. I mean, I think it's probably in my Irish blood. But yeah, so that was 2019. I spoke at a conference of 500 people. And I don't know, I guess I'm very fortunate in that it doesn't really generally faze me. And yeah, I'm always quite happy to talk to anybody about it, especially if I think it's going to be a way that's going to encourage more positive dialogue, and a way that's going to empower more people and educate them in what we do, in the message of what I believe is truly regenerative farming. Which, again, you asked me, at the start, about what I see about rewilding, and I said it's all about people. I would say actually the same as about regenerative agriculture. Really, it's all about people. It's about, reconnecting with the land. It's about producing food and by harnessing the true natural abundance of nature, which is, I always say it's the most efficient system. We're pretty smart as people, right? We're pretty smart as a human race, but we're not smarter than nature. And we try to outsmart nature. We try to create situations or develop technologies that we perceive as making what we do more efficient, but we're never more efficient than nature, and we're never more productive than nature. So I think the true crux of regenerative agriculture to me is relearning how to truly interact with the land and enact the abundance of food that we need to survive out of that in a way where everything else is thriving. So yeah, I'll quite happily talk to anybody any day about that.
And how do you strike a balance between wanting to spread this message and, I'm assuming, having a lot of opportunities and being invited to present your ideas and your experiences to a lot of people? How do you balance that with wanting to get the message out there and actually what you need to do on the croft?
So I think in part it's kind of self-regulating, and in part it's self-management. So I'd say the self-regulation side is that, I would say earlier on, in when we were doing what we were doing, there was more, I guess we there was more kind of people looking to speak to us. Now that I would say more people are doing or practicing or transitioning to regenerative agriculture, the pool has opened up. So we don't really get kind of inundated. Like, we're not sort of constantly in this kind of like tsunami of information, which is great because there's more people out there to talk about it more, which is brilliant. So in part it's self-regulated, I think, as the movement has grown, and then in part it's been our own self-management, because at the end of the day, the whole reason why we moved to Lynbreck to do what it is that we're doing was about quality of life. It was about living a good life, not using that as a naive unachievable, but actually saying, well, no, I actually want to live a good and happy life, a healthy life. So we've had to learn, and still learning, how to manage that in a way where you're running you're making enough money to pay the bills, you're growing your own food, you're earning, any extra income that you need to from other sources, but that you're waking up every day and going, well, this is pretty awesome. So we've had to learn how to say no to things. We've had to learn how to prioritize tasks, prioritize projects, and take more rest. I think anybody that works in farming and crofting knows that one of the most important things that you need to do to your land, to your animals, is give them rest. Rest the land so that it can recover. We're terrible at doing it to ourselves. We're terrible at giving ourselves rest time. And that's one thing that we've really worked on, particularly in the last few years, has been taking time off during the week, taking holidays, actually physically leaving the place, letting somebody else look after it for us, and having some downtime. And I think that's really important.
Taking holiday must be one of the most difficult things, leaving basically your baby in the hands of somebody else. And I think, one of the things, I mean, even like we find it hard going away. We've got like chickens, bees, and vegetable garden. And we went on a holiday, and Gary's like leaving the people who are looking after our house detailed instructions on time and quantity of watering, and and we still came home and the chickens had no water, and we were like, oh my goodness. Anyway, they're all fine. Okay, we've still got all the chickens, but but it's that leaving that control, which probably does make it hard to then develop a work-life balance. And I mean, it's obviously been a challenge.
Definitely. And as I keep saying to you, we've still not nailed this. We're still working on it, but I do really see the value in it. And I think, we started off just trying to take some more day trips, so that you can still do the chores in the morning, and then you can do the chores in the evening. And even just 8 hours off, you go away for a nice coffee, you maybe get a scone, you have a walk somewhere. I mean, that is transformational in itself. But then making the leap to actually leaving, that was only something that we really managed to start from last year. And it was finding somebody who we really trust to look after the place, and just, yeah, really kind of prioritizing that. Do you know what? I truly believe that if your farm or your croft is truly resilient, you can leave it and come back to it by giving somebody instructions that will not mean that it's too difficult to look after. If it's so difficult to look after it, then it's not resilient, because at any point in your life you can get sick, you can get, run over by a bus, whatever. So your farm has to be resilient, and that comes from how it's run. It has to be efficient, it has to be easy, it has to be straightforward, it has to be harmonious. So actually, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is getting it to a point where it's fine, it's okay. It's you that's the problem. It's not the farm or the croft. And that's the hardest challenge to overcome. So, we do struggle, to leave it whenever we're, it's the day before and you're just thinking, is it worth it? Is it really worth it? And then, you come back and it takes about a week to kind of get back into things, but you just feel that time away is so nutritious. When you're, last year we went to Switzerland for a week, stay with Sandra's family, and that was the first time I went away and I thought, you know what, I don't want to even know what's happening there, because I'm not there. I don't even want to know. And there was one time, because Sandra's brother lives on site, and there was one time we called them, and I was just kind of hankering in the back of the room going, I don't want to know. I just don't want to know. So that was so healthy. So we try and then, make nowadays that we get at least a week a year away, we get some weekends away, we get some day trips. It's so critical. It's so critical. It's so important.
And are there any other big challenges you've faced that you've not touched on that you think we should talk about? I mean, Charlotte mentioned the word borehole when we were talking before.
Lord, the water. Well, no, it's a good yeah, I mean, water. Why would you mention that, Charlotte? That's me.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's water. Who thought that you would move to Scotland and water would be an issue. And that's one of our biggest challenges, and it's always a constant thought. Every year we're like, where else can we put a water butt, where else can we harvest water from, where else can we store water? That to me is pretty bonkers and a little bit worrying, to be honest with you, that we can be in the northeast of Scotland and we can have wells run dry. Um, you know, that didn't happen. According to the local folks, that didn't happen 30, 40 years ago. In part, it's this change in weather patterns where we're seeing longer periods of drier weather, but also it's the fact that we're getting less so in the winter. So we're not getting the snow melt that would have happened, which would have gradually kind of fed, groundwater systems. So that's a big obsession of ours, is water retention. And I'd say the other kind of biggest challenge has just been finance. Has been financing all of this. So it's been financing what we needed to get set up, and so we were really lucky to access some of the the rural payments funding for that kind of thing. But then it's also been keeping it going as well. Subsidies exist for a reason. They exist because of the cost of food is less than what it costs to produce, and so you're kind of battling in that system, to try and not just kind of get it set up, but to try and keep it running as well. So that's where, for me, I say, farming with nature, it's a very nice thing to say. It's not just about the birds and the bees, it's about the diversity in which your farm runs. So I'm very much an advocate of a diversified farm, leads to a diversified stream of income, which leads to greater resilience. So we have chickens, we have pigs, we have hens, we have bees, we do courses, we do tours, we have some off-farm income. We do all sorts of things. And that to me is truly kind of about farming with nature. So that's the other big challenge that I would say. And again, I think that's pretty endemic in farming. It's really trying to see how you can make it pay and not charge so much for your produce that people just simply won't buy it.
And that's the other thing in all this, isn't it? That your passion for allowing people to kind of access these foods also means that you're not going to be the people who are going to charge extraordinary quantities for a carrot. Do you know? Like it's that balance, isn't it? That you want people to have that passion, have those experiences, but also you have to run a financially viable business for you to be able to stay doing what you're doing at Lynbreck, and for it to for you to see the benefits in 25, 30 years like you shared.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, it's kind of taking that sort of fact about the challenges of making something pay whenever you're trying to produce food, and then using that as an opportunity to, when people are on site, is to talk about food and say, whenever you think about, let's say this tomato, for example, tomato is full of polyphenols. Polyphenols are its defense mechanisms, which help to kind of keep it safe from pests and diseases. Whenever you eat one of those from an organic system, it's up to 40% higher in these polyphenols. You put that into your body, you're putting all that goodness, all that defense mechanism into your body. How much is that worth to you? How much is that of value to you? So therefore, how much of your hard-earned money are you willing to spend on that as a form of medicine, as a form of direct health into your body, which feeds your gut microbiome, which feeds your mental well-being? How much is that of value to you? And all of a sudden you start to have these conversations where you're like, maybe actually investing in food to give me all of that isn't actually such a bad investment to make, and maybe I'm willing to invest a little bit more in it, in terms of what I grow myself, or in terms of what I buy on the in the shelf at the supermarket. And that is how you change the system. It's not from the ground up, it's from the consumer back. I think it's how you win those hearts and minds.
So you've recently had the opportunity to mentor others through the Farm Advisory Service. What's that been like for you?
Oh my goodness, we absolutely love it. In fact, going forward, it's something we really want to do a lot more of. So yeah, the opportunity that's available through the Farm Advisory Service is absolutely mind-blowingly brilliant, whereby farms and crofts can apply for up to 4 days of our time, that's paid through the Farm Advisory Service. And I think we've got about 4 or 5 active mentees at the minute. So people with everything from sort of small farms, maybe 11, 12 acres, up to 20, to larger land holdings, 100 acres. And it's been incredible. It's been an opportunity for us to get lots of little day trips because we travel all around Scotland to go and visit people, which is brilliant. But we get to use our experience to help them figure out what it is that they want to do. And actually, a lot of it starts with, why are you here? Why are you doing what you're doing? How is it you want to feel every morning when you wake up? So what can we then, when you figure all that out, how can we then help you develop a way, a farming or a crofting model to make sure that you're catering for that? So a really truly sustainable regenerative one. So you're looking at different food production systems, from anything from cattle or sheep or pigs or whatever, to growing your own food, to growing it at scale, and really using all of that to create a truly harmonious little kind of successful business. So we've just been loving that, and as I say, that's definitely something we're really keen to do more of.
And I mean, 7 years ago, did you ever envisage that you'd now be mentoring others in what you do yourselves now?
No, because 7 years ago we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. I mean, we had a vague kind of trajectory. We had a vague kind of, I think 7 years ago, actually, at pretty much exactly this time, I was writing our first kind of business plan, which was to apply for the first kind of grant funding that we were going for. So it was all very much pie in the sky. It was all very much, this is the ideal, and really, I think, honestly, it's not really changed that much. The details have changed, but actually what we set out to do 7 years ago, whenever we just moved here, we're kind of doing, and that's really cool to reflect on, because in spite of the fact that none of it was really kind of planned, because all of it came from our gut and our heart, it's kind of still on the same road. So that's quite fun. That's quite fun to see.
And the big question is, what comes next for you? Is there a second book maybe? Or have you got some other exciting plans? What comes next?
We're chilling out. No. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, we're very lucky. We've got ourselves to a point where we've got a lot of our infrastructure in place. Okay, we've just built a second polycrub, but nothing else major in that route. From a kind of a practical level, in terms of the sort of the farming and crofting side, we can't stop ourselves from planting more trees. Our big kind of future big focus going forward is planting more fruit trees. So creation of more fruit, more orchards, soft fruits. They grow really well in this area, and they can produce abundance of food. So the vision is that we'll have these sort of connected habitat systems of fields, kind of wood pasture fields, with pockets of orchards where you've got cattle moving through. It's the large herbivores in the landscape. You have, really diverse woodlands where you have pigs snuffling. So that's the kind of the landscape that we're looking to create. So more fruit tree planting, more fruit bush planting, really kind of up that food production side of things. And then I would say, from a sort of a sort of a personal side, definitely we really enjoy the mentoring. We feel that we have a lot of learning to share with people, so we'd really like to develop that a lot more. We enjoy running our courses, our summer courses. So we just run 2 of our week-long ones a year. So we hope to keep kind of doing that, and also just working on our own time. Every year we finesse it a little bit better. We get a little bit more efficient in what we're doing. We carve a little bit more time out for ourselves, personally, as a couple, for friends, for holidays. So really prioritizing all that as well. I can't quite bring myself to write another book just now, but but never say never. But it's not immediately on the cards. It's just living.
Lynn, one of the, a question that we ask all our guests and what we end on is, what advice would you give to the next generation of rural women in Scotland? What was yours be?
So I think my bit of advice, which I've always tried to follow myself, is just whenever you've got a big decision to make, whenever you've got a problem to resolve, whenever you're faced with a challenge that just seems kind of so insurmountable that you don't really know how to overcome it, is follow your gut. That's what I've always tried to do in life. Your gut always tells you what's right. Your head can always tell you what's the most practical solution, what's the most sensible solution, what's the what's all of that. But if it doesn't align with what your gut says, just don't do it. that would be my best advice that I would give to somebody.
I love that. What a way to end. Just like follow your gut, particularly after all that talk about like food and how good that is for your like for your well-being and all of that. So I totally love that as a way to end. So thank you so much, Lynn, for joining us today and sharing your stories, experiences and lessons.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the conversation, for inviting me onto the Women and Wellies podcast. It's been really great fun to chat with you guys today.
If you want to connect with Lynn and see what's going on in the croft on social media, you'll find all the details in the show notes. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us on Instagram at Women and Wellies Podcast to stay up to date with all the latest news.
And you can email us with any questions on womenandwelliespodcast@gmail.com, and we'd love it if you could leave us a review and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Until next time.